Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Run Cape Town podcast. My name is Jamie Hutting, and I'm joined once again by Coach Ntutu Letseka. We are running coaches at coachparry.com. Today, we are on episode 9, which means we are 6 weeks out. Time really has flown, but although we are 6 weeks out, you can still make plenty of progress going through to the 19th of October. So, welcome to check out our plans down in the description below. Today, we'll be covering a little bit of news that might have reached your inbox this week from Cape Town Marathon. And then we'll also be chatting about some upcoming races that many people might be running next week. And then adjustments to your plans if you maybe are planning around certain race dates, as well as equipment and gear that you might be running in or thinking about running in for your marathon. So, upcoming in exactly 7 days' time, we've got exciting Gun Run, which is definitely a popular race in Cape Town. Leading up to Cape Town Marathon, it covers, the 5, the 10, and the half marathon distances. So I'm sure plenty of our listeners will be running that, and we'll touch on making those adjustments to your plan if you do plan on running that in a few minutes. And then also there is the Randwater Vaal River City Marathon, which does do, the distances from the 5K all the way up to the marathon distance. And that is in Vanderbijl Park for anyone that might not have heard of that race just yet. So before we get into that, that was a very long intro. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. It's very wet out here now. I feel like summer is over in the Northern Hemisphere. The last week or so has been shifting between some sunny days and some wet days. I've been rained on a lot during my runs, but you know what? You got to do what you got to do. And
Yes.
I think today it was 14 degrees, which is, yeah,
Hmm.
it's getting there, starting to get there. It's only September. So.
Yes. I mean, as much as it's cooling down there, it actually seems like a lot of South Africa is warming up.
Exactly, yeah.
Seeing lots of photos on the promenade in Cape Town, and it seems like my family up in Gauteng are already in shorts and t-shirts through the days.
It's amazing, and especially in Gauteng, how on the 1st of September it just says, "Oh, it's going to be hot now." Forget about it. That's
Yes.
it.
No, it's really crazy, but hopefully we are gearing up to slightly warmer weather for race date in October. For those that are listening that might not already know, if you might not follow Coach Parry on Instagram, just have a look out at our page. We've got exciting tips going out every single day. Leading up until race date, we've got a 50-day series running, and you'll see the whole Coach Parry team, or majority of us, on that, giving out very valuable tips on the Instagram platform. Of course, you would have heard a lot of those tips already and still coming every Sunday on the podcast, but it's nice just to quickly open up for a minute on Instagram, because I know once Ntutu gets talking, you might be on the podcast for a few minutes. But with that, getting into, we always speak about the golden nuggets of each podcast. And Tutu, would you mind just updating us on potentially, some people might not be checking their emails every day, just updating us on the news that came out about seeding earlier this week?
So if you remember earlier on, we spoke about how, of course, with the number of runners in Cape Town, it is a seeded race, and the runners usually used to go off in batches. So you were given a start time, and you go off in sequence. It doesn't affect your finish time because, of course, it's a mat-to-mat race. So your time starts when you cross the start line. And this year they have changed how they do it now. They're doing two different starts. So it's either starting from Beach Road or the stadium, and then within those starts, you have different waves, and those waves alternate between the stadium and Beach Road. And then within a wave, you have batches, which have their own start times. So it's quite a complicated process. But for you runners, you don't need to worry at all about that, because you will have all the information that you need. And earlier this week, an email should have been sent out to you that gives you all the information you need. What you have in that email is your start location, so you'll know whether you're starting at Beach Road or at the stadium, what wave you're in. And remember, the waves are multicolored waves. So I think there's a green wave, a red wave, and so on and so on. And then you also have your batch number, and then you'll have your batch start time. And so that is very, very important information to have, because then you know exactly where you need to go on race day and what time you need to be there and what time you'll be starting. And again, remember, if you're starting at 6:15 or 7 o'clock, it doesn't matter, because your race starts when you cross the start line, and then your time is mat to mat. And your badge where you're starting was determined based on either half marathon or marathon time that you gave in with your entry. And if you have run the Cape Town Marathon beforehand, those times were also used to put you into your different batches and the different ways that you'd be starting in. You can request a change, but that date is, the window is quite tight. It's ending next week Friday, well, this coming Friday, on the, what date is that? On the 12th of September. So on the 12th of September is the last date for changes. And what that means that you can then submit a new time. So if you have run a marathon, and I hope you have not run a marathon during your marathon training, but if since you entered the race, you have run a faster marathon time or you run a faster half marathon time, you may submit that time by the 12th of September to request a change of your seating. It doesn't guarantee that it will be changed, but once you submit it, a change might be made and you might be moved up to a different start weight. My personal opinion, I don't think that matters so much, particularly as the way the race has been designed is to ensure that is to limit traffic. That's why they're doing the two starts in the different waves. The idea is that they're going to thin the crowd out in the first 10K, so you're not going to have the bottlenecks you usually have. And mostly you're going to hopefully be around people who have the same ability as you, so you don't end up either running, too slowly, or what I think is actually worse is running too fast in the beginning, where the people around you are much faster than you are. And they drag you through the first 10, 15Ks, and then you end up struggling at the end. So that's the really exciting news. And I think this is good information to have. I'm sure all of you have been waiting to figure out where you are starting and what time you'll be starting. So please, if you haven't checked your emails, do so as the information is out. And as we said, you can change your seating, but don't place too much emphasis on it. And please, I know you might have tried to run a race this weekend to try and improve. Racing next weekend won't help because it'll be after the submission date. But seeding is not the be all and end all of the race. What is important is that you have your race strategy. And if you stick to your race strategy and train smart in these remaining 6 weeks, you will have a good day on race day.
No, 100%. I mean, as much as we have the Vaal River Marathon coming up in 7 days' time, super, super important what you said there. If you are looking to increase or better your time before Cape Town Marathon, you would have already missed that date. So, Vaal River is actually also a Comrades and Two Oceans qualifier, if I'm not mistaken. And so, lots of people might be running that and then running Cape Town Marathon. So if they are maybe, working towards Comrades or Two Oceans next year, what would you recommend they do if they're looking to maybe race both of them?
I mean, my feelings, you can't race both of them. I know people do that, but if you're trying to race two marathons 5 weeks apart, you are going to sacrifice one of them. You're either going to decrease performance in both. So you might do reasonably well at both races, unlikely, but you may. Or what most likely happens is that you're going to have a poor Cape Town Marathon. And one of the things is that Cape Town is sea level and Vanderbilt is at altitude. I think it's 1,500 meters. And just from a pure physiological point of view, it is much easier to run a marathon at sea level than it is to run at altitude. So if you're going to pick one of those races to be your goal race, I mean, I assume if you're listening to this podcast, that is your goal is Cape Town. Always remember what the goal in mind is, and that your goal is to run Cape Town as well as you can and to maximize your performance that day. So racing a marathon 5 weeks out before is not a smart idea. I'd even argue that even to do it as a long run is not a smart idea. It's one of the misconceptions in running that because we don't do the marathon distance in marathon training, people often feel that you are not well prepared, but we know from reality and from practice that you don't need to run the full marathon distance to be able to go out there and perform. Your capacity to train is built across the 8, 9, 10, 12 weeks you've been training. All those runs matter. The volume you've accumulated over the full training plan is going to be what matters, and don't sacrifice it for that marathon distance run. Just to give you an idea, and it's always better when you give examples, is that if, for example, you're training, if you're training to run a 4-hour marathon, for example, you obviously aren't going to run a training marathon at the same pace as your racing marathon. You're going to run quite a little bit slower. So you'll probably be looking at more like 7 minutes a K as a training pace, maybe 6:30, 6:45. You are then going to be out on your feet for 4.5 hours, 4 hours and 40 minutes on a training run,
Sure.
5 weeks
Mm.
out from your marathon. You're
Mm.
going to be asking for trouble. And that's part of the reason why we don't actually suggest that people do the marathon distance in training, and also why we set our long runs by time. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, a faster runner, if you are an elite runner and you're doing a 40K training run, it will take you 2 hours and 30 minutes if you are a world class runner. And they
Yeah.
really do. Kipchoge does 40Ks for his long runs. It takes him 2 hours and 25 minutes. We are
It's
not that good.
amazing.
If we try and do 40Ks as a training run, we'll be out for more than 4 hours. And that means that you are spending time out, and all of that eccentric loading, the muscle damage, you're using up all your resources, your carbohydrate resources. It's mentally fatiguing in so many ways. That compounds the recovery time afterwards. And the following week's training is impacted by your decision to run that marathon, which means you now have to adjust the following week, possibly cut out your interval session, and maybe not even get a long run in the following week. So
Yeah.
that's always the thinking that you need to do when you're looking at that. So if you are going to be doing the Van der Bijl Park race, though, just rather do the 21 if your goal is Cape
Mm.
Town. Do the 21K as a long training run. That's a viable
Yeah.
solution. But we are 5 to 6 weeks out, and this is actually probably for me personally, I think the latest that you can go out and test yourself. And this might be a good time if you spend, 8, 9 weeks training. You might want to just go out and and run a race and see where you're at. I'm not a big fan of doing half marathons this close to a marathon,
Mm.
but if you do it smartly, you can recover from it in time, and that's we'll talk about how to recover from that. But it is
Yeah.
possible to race a half marathon at this point and still have enough time to recover. But if you're doing a 5K or a 10K, this is a good time to do it. A 10K will not take much out of you, and this could be a good way for you to see if you're trying to run a 4 hour marathon or a 3:30 or a 4:30. We've spoken about what sort of times you need, what 5K time, 10K times correlate to those marathon times. I'm not going to go through them now again, but you can then look at those and say, okay, and you can go out and run a 10K and see where you're at, and just almost it can be reassuring, but don't do it at the expense of the bigger picture in training. That's always
Yeah.
important. And
Completely.
yeah, so you're going to say?
It's all about priorities, I think. So for example, if someone has already got their entry for Vaal and for Cape Town, and you do plan on running both of them, then it is all about priorities, as you said, that things will affect one another.
Yeah,
So, yeah, we've got, of course, Gun Run as well coming up. Um,
yeah,
but with that, a lot of the plans, if they follow that sort of 4 week cycle that we have mentioned in the previous episodes, then that will be happening next week, Sunday. And then those recovery weeks will generally be happening the week after.
yeah.
So, speaking about making adjustments to the plan, because we want to make sure, if you are going to go out and test yourself, ideally, you shouldn't be training super hard the day before. We would have some sort of drop or recovery week leading up into that. So, what would you like to mention if we are making those adjustments to your plan?
So this is also part of why racing during training is a very, very tricky prospect, because you do have a plan. But I mean, my feeling is I always say a training plan is written in pencil anyway. So you don't commit to 12 weeks of training. You're actually committing
Mm.
to the current week. And if something happens, if you get sick, if it gets, if it's hot or it's wet or you travel,
Oh,
you make adjustments on the
yeah.
fly. It's important. You need to be flexible. And if people want to run races, I think races are good for people. They're good for them to reassure them that they're actually training well. They're
Mm.
actually also very good training stimulus. It can be very useful when you do a race. It gives you confidence. It does physically test you, and it is a training stimulus. And you can actually, if you time it well, you can get a good boost on it to your fitness, as long as that stimulus is not too big that you can't
Mm.
recover from it afterwards. So we do have to be flexible and allow people to incorporate races into the calendar. So what I like to do, if you're doing any race, a 5K, 10K, or half marathon, you can train through a race, which people used to do in the past. I know my father, when he was marathon training, would often train through races. What you're doing there is you're compromising performance. You are taking a hit and
Mm.
saying, I'm going to do this race for the experience of racing, but I don't care about the time,
Mm.
which can sometimes be demotivating. But if you do care about the time, then you do need to incorporate a bit of a taper before that race. And you can just do what we call a mini taper. So not a full 2 week taper. What I always like to do is in that race week, you train normally until about the Tuesday. So you normally get
Mm.
in your Tuesday session. You might want to cut a rep out or maybe go a little bit slower, but you can train up until Tuesday. Then from that point on, if you're racing on a Sunday, you've now got 4 days where you're going to reduce volume.
Yeah.
And you follow the same principles that you would if you were doing, if you're training for any other race. Um, Not an aggressive taper, but you normally do sort of like I personally will do 25% less for what I
Mm.
do. So if I normally run an hour, I will run 45 minutes. If I was running an
Yeah.
hour and 15, I'd run about 55 minutes. And you generally reduce the training load leading into the race to allow yourself to freshen up. You're not fully tapering. We don't want you to
Mm.
peak. We just want you to freshen up enough that you can go out onto that day and be able to give in a good performance that does justice to your fitness.
Yeah.
You will not necessarily run a PB. And I think this is also where people get lost in the rush of things. Not every race you do is going to be a PB race, especially if
No.
you are in the middle of a marathon training block where you are running high volume, long runs that are counter to performance in 5K and 10K races. So almost what you want to use these races for is not to chase a PB, but to confirm that you're on track for your goal. So you know
Yes.
what when you started your plan, you knew that you were in for whatever goal. So I'll give you example of when I was training for my marathon, I was aiming to run a 250 marathon and I had to run a 10K in 36 minutes or so. So in the middle of my training plan, I ran a 10 miler and I knew that I had to run 60 minutes for 10 miler, not to run a PB, but that was in
Mm.
line with where I needed to be if I'm trying to run a 250 marathon. I did manage to achieve my goal. But I didn't go
Yeah.
out there and sacrifice my broader picture and try and run, my best 10 miler ever. It was to make sure that I'm progressing where I need to be for the race. And I think that's a better use of these races. So a short mini taper to freshen up and to take a little bit of fatigue out. But more importantly is what you do after the race.
Yeah.
What you don't want to do, and luckily, if you are following a 4 week cycle with the races coming up this coming weekend, they are going to then lead into the recovery week. Don't be tempted to now say, oh, but I did a little bit of a mini taper for this race. I'm not going to start back and load more mileage in. Take that recovery, especially if you run a half marathon. The half
Yeah.
marathon is probably the most disrespected race distance in the world. It's not as hard as a 10K intensity wise and not as long as a marathon. So people think, oh, I don't
Mm.
need to worry too much about it. But half marathon is hard on your legs. And if you are running a half marathon and you're taking an hour and a half or 2 hours or longer, you're still spending a lot of time on your feet. So
Mm.
take the time after the race to recover. A 10K, personally, I feel needs 2 to 3 days of easy light training following. So if you race on Sunday, don't do your interval session on Tuesday. You need to then just take Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, ideally easy. You don't have to take the time off. You can still do some sessions, but replace interval sessions with easy runs. Half
Mm.
marathon, 3 to 5 days. And I know we're close to a race, but again, this is a recovery. You need to do this recovery. Otherwise, you're going to be carrying all that fatigue when you then go on and do your longest run 4 weeks out.
Yeah. You're
So
just
you
building
want
on
to,
it.
yeah, exactly. So it's that you need to take in the 4 days before to taper in and freshen up, and then you need to take in 3 to 5 days afterwards to make sure you recover from that hard effort. So you're essentially committing a week
Yeah.
roughly around that race to allow you to put in a good performance and then recover. And that's
Yeah.
often why when we say when you run races in training, you need to be very, very careful about how often you commit to them because you are giving up a week at a time
Yeah.
with the mini taper and post race recovery. And you need to be cognizant of all the other things you need to do, like stretching, foam rolling, whatever needs to happen, nutrition. Hard race is hard on the muscles.
Mm.
It breaks down muscle. You deplete like fuel resources. So make sure that you eat after races. Take in all the
Yeah.
post-race nutrition and sleep. Rest. Sleep is your secret weapon. Make sure you get
Yeah.
enough sleep. And I know we all like to have a beer after a hard race. You can, but don't overindulge, of course. Or whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a beer. But I know I used to like having a beer after an important race. But just then make sure that you don't indulge too much and you recover properly
Mm.
afterwards. So that's kind of like with the races, it really is about racing is not a bad thing, but just be aware of how it affects your training program broadly and that you are sacrificing that little bit of time to allow yourself to be fresh and then to recover. And then by the following weekend, you should be back on. And then you've got 4 weeks to go after that.
Yeah.
It's at five
Yeah.
weeks, 4 to 5 weeks after it. Um, it's also why I think this is probably as late as you want to leave it. I don't want, I'd not like to see people still trying to run races mid-September, like on the
No.
19th of September or that weekend, because then you're getting too close. Once you're 4 weeks closer to a race, you're heading into your
Mm.
longest long run, and that
Yeah.
recovery around the race then starts to impact the following week.
Yeah. As a bit of a side question here in Tutu, I have, spoken to some athletes that during this time, especially if they're going to their first marathon, they're going through volumes that they haven't necessarily done before. And often the immune system drops now, and people tend to get sick. And they might be, in a recovery week, which is great. But then getting back into training, should they be moving their weeks around, the weeks that are slightly higher volumes and ones that are lower, to get in certain volume as we get closer to race date?
So look, what will happen in a long training cycle is you'll get sick. These
Mm,
things happen. You get sick, you might get niggly, and it will affect your training. And what we've always said is don't panic. This is the
yes.
really important thing: is don't panic. Don't feel like, oh, I've lost 3 days of training, I need to make that time up.
Mm,
You write off lost training days. There's nothing you can do about them. They're gone. Don't try and catch them up. You always keep
yes.
the goal in mind. And remember, what the worst thing you can do is, and if you have been sick for a while, for it doesn't even have to be long. Say it's you get a bit of a cold. I know when my son was in primary school, he always used to come home and give me whatever bugs he had, and I'd be constantly losing training time. What you don't want to do is say, oh, I've missed my long run because I was sick. I'm going to now shift my long run to next weekend. And then what happens to what was planned for that weekend? You shift it a few days on. Next thing you have this
Yes.
concertina effect where everything is getting compressed into a narrow block. And you end up having, we spoke about the biggest risk with injury is when you increase volume of individual runs a lot, or you increase total training load a lot in one go in a very short frame of time. So
Yeah.
don't try and catch up and try and then fit missed workouts into other training days, because you're going to compress the amount of training you're doing in a very short period of time and increase that
Yes.
training load. And that increased training load is going to be the big trigger for a potential injury event, which then means you're going to be out even longer.
Yeah.
So
No,
if you have
completely.
been out and you have been sick, you need to ensure that you come back like safely. So what I always say is the first run back 20 minutes. I know you're in the middle of marathon training, but we're concerned about the long term here, and we want you to be fit and healthy on race day. First run back 20 minutes, take a race day. If you feel good, you can do 50% of your normal training for the next session. And then what you want to do is gradually build that up 75% and then ultimately back to full volume. I always say if you've been out for 3 days, you take 3 days to get back to full volume. If you've been out for
Mm,
5 days, you take 5 days to get back to full volume, increasing 50%, 75% to full volume. You're doing this because you're allowing your body to reacclimate itself to the stress of running. If you go from
yeah.
taking 5 days off and you do a 30K long run, you are now imposing a whole bunch of stress on your body that is not used to it, but it has lost a bit of an edge from having 5 days off. Plus, you've probably been carrying a virus.
Yes.
So you don't want to
Yeah.
now jump in and just say, I'm going to do 30Ks. And if I say I missed a long one, I'm going to do 30Ks on Friday, and then I'm going to do my missed one on Sunday. Again, it's a lot of stress in a very short period of time. So
Mm,
rather be safe and remember that it is the volume of training you've done over 12 weeks, not the 5 days you've missed. And I know
yeah.
it's frustrating, and you feel like you might be missing something, but it's ultimately how much training you've done over the full training plan that matters more than 1 or 2 runs that you may miss because you're sick. And when you are sick, your body's still under stress. When it's
Yeah.
clearing a virus or healing a niggle, um, it's doing work to heal and repair itself. And now you want to add in more running, you're compounding how much work your body needs to do to recover. You're adding
Yeah.
recovery from the illness or the niggle on top of physiological and muscular recovery from the stress of running.
Yeah. No, completely. Thank you for that, Ntutu. I know we have touched on the illness side of things right at the start. I think it was one of the very first episodes, but it's really good just to remind listeners if they are feeling ill around this time or the days coming up. So we spoke about using races as training runs, but also practice or maybe testers. Now, testers, it's not just about performance. We can also test, the feeling of racing if you haven't done it in a while or it's your first one. Getting used to those race day nerves, practicing your food, but then also practicing your clothing.
Yeah.
Something that I went into a flat spin about. Extreme panic was my first sprint triathlon. I didn't know that I needed to bring safety pins to pin my number on. And I went out, gosh, somewhere in the northwest. I couldn't even give you the exact location. It was out there. I drove a sand road, not even a dirt road, to get there. And I was out there early in the morning and no safety pins. Panic
Yeah.
set in, and luckily, super kind community. Someone lent me a few extras because they were seasoned triathletes. So there are things like that that are really good to practice and get out the way, especially if you're building up to a bigger race. If Cape Town Marathon is your goal for this year, it's your big race. Maybe doing gun run is more of a practice and a little bit of fun, doing with some friends, for example. So those are good things to get out the way. So maybe we
Yeah.
should just chat a little bit on about clothing and your equipment or your gear that you'll be using for race day.
Yeah, so we always say no new things on race day, and this applies very much to your gear. And broadly, you can separate it. Like I think, like your shoes are a whole separate topic. Runners and their shoes, very very important. And then of course your race kit and the sort of thing, your socks. For women, bras. If you wear sports bras, if you wear heart rate monitors, if you wear cap, I
Yeah.
can't remember anything in my head. So yeah, so it's all those little things that you need to think about. So the first thing really is the shoes, and shoes are like just the most insanely personal thing in the world ever. Like I really like it's, I struggle when someone says to me, looking for advice for shoes. Because I'm like, I actually don't know. I can tell you
Yeah.
what I like, but it doesn't mean you like the same thing. And also sometimes you might use a shoe and it's fine for a 20K run, but you don't know what it's going
Mm,
to be like after 30Ks. It can be quite challenging. So you need to be have an idea of what you're going to be racing in. And I think it's important by now, at this point in time, you should have a very, very, like I'll say be 90% certain that you're going to be using a certain model shoe, whatever it is. Doesn't matter what
yeah.
brand it is. The best shoe is the one that fits you and that is comfortable for you and that is obviously suitable for the goal. And you've got to make sure that it can last 42Ks. You don't want to run in like, a shoe that doesn't have enough cushioning to last you
No.
the full race. But what you need to be doing now is you need to be sort of testing the shoe. And I think what's important here is that, okay, and look, people run in very different things. I think a lot of people will use normal trainers, normal daily cushion trainers. Some of us like to run in racing shoes. We're convinced they give us those extra seconds per kilometer. And of course, the big elephant in the room, carbon shoes, which we cannot
Mm-hmm.
deny that carbon shoes make a massive difference. I think at this point, the evidence is clear. If you wear
Yeah.
one of those shoes and you are fit and trained, you are going to be shaving time off, and they are faster than regular shoes because of how they work. And the science is very clear on that. So with those specialist racing shoes, whether they're carbon shoes or old school racing flats, I wouldn't do like your longest run in them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you should test them out, and you should test them out ideally on some of your faster sessions. So I would use them for a track session or two, and if your plan calls for a tempo run or that type of session, that's actually a very good place to use your shoes. What you don't want to do as well is run in a very old pair of shoes because the foam in the shoe actually compresses over time and it loses reactivity. Because the really good thing about the shoes, and particularly with the modern shoes, with the super shoes, is that the foam um, is actually the magical thing. Is that
Mm,
it gives back all that energy. So when your foot lands, you put a whole bunch of force through your foot, and and the shoe actually absorbs that energy, and the energy returns back, and that propels you forward. So the older the shoe gets, that energy return gets reduced. So you don't want to be running in a shoe that has done 500-600 Ks. We look at
mm,
a shoe that has done maybe about 100 Ks or 150 Ks. You need to have gotten used to it, but not
yeah.
running so much that you've actually broken down the foam, and then obviously then it's not going to be as optimum for you for racing. So make sure that you're familiar with the shoe that you're going to run in. And like I said, for the carbon shoes, you got to be very, very careful with them. Don't do your long runs in them. They don't play well when you run slower. Those shoes are designed
Mm.
for you to run with at a fast pace, with good leg turnover. And when you're running slow, there's a lot more active work with your feet, and you're doing a lot more work. And people will complain often that their ankles get sore, and you do end up with people getting Achilles injuries and that sort of thing. From running in carbon shoes. So don't do long runs in carbon shoes. Do some track sessions in them, but shoes are critical. So and I don't want to spend too much time on that because again, it's a very, very personal choice. But figure out what you're going to run in, and then make sure that you have tested them out, that they don't rub your feet, in the weirdest way. You don't get blisters that you didn't realize you were going to get, and that sort of thing. Because that could be
Mm.
terrible if you're 25 k's in and you get blisters
Oh,
because you haven't figured out. And make sure also they fit, because your feet swell when you
yeah.
race, because your feet get hot. So make sure that the shoe is fitted properly, and all those things. And this is the time to figure that out now. You don't want to be scrambling around on race week trying to find a pair of shoes because the shoe you thought you were going to run in is now hurting your feet. So
Yeah.
that's a very, very critical part. And then the race kit. So I remember when I was doing my long run, and I bought a belt to carry my gels in, and I just bought something off Amazon. I didn't really think about it, and like at 30 k's into my long run, I just felt like there was a sharp stinging pain at the back. Obviously, I was sweating, and the salt was getting into a wound because the clip at the back was sliding under my shirt and was
Mm.
rubbing my back. So I got lower back chafe from my belt. Now, if I had only figured this out on marathon day, that would have been a terrible, terrible thing. So obviously, didn't use that, and I bought a different belt that did fit better. So it's all those little things that you would be very, very wary about. So what I like to do is you need to do at least one of your long runs closer to race day in your full race kit.
Yeah.
So what you intend to race in. So the shirt you're going to wear, if you're going to be wearing a heart rate monitor, underwear, the shorts, the socks, the full shebang. So put everything on and go out and do your long run in them, because you want to make sure that when you're running for duration, that nothing weird happens. Because again, when you sweat, I found when I sweat, my heart rate monitor belt slides down. So I spend half the run trying to pull this thing back up. And it's like, it looks very weird that I'm running around and just like grabbing at my shirt every 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So those sort of things, again, you don't want to find that out on race day. Chafing. You don't want to figure out that your shorts, when you sweat, start to rub you in the thighs and you get chafing, that belts don't rub the wrong way. If you're wearing a hydration vest, does it actually fit properly? Because again, when you're sweating and things are moving around, what happens? So you need to
Yeah.
figure that out on race day, before race day, sorry. And then what I also like to do is, like I said, don't use your racing shoes ready for your long runs. And then what I like to do is
Hmm.
on a track session, same thing, full race kit with my racing shoes. Go out, and then you're doing a full test. So you're having different avenues of testing your different bits of equipment, make sure that everything works as it's meant to do. You don't want to be surprised on race day when something doesn't behave like what you thought it would, because you don't know what happens when you've been running for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours.
Yeah.
Because at an hour things don't work the same way as they do after 3 hours. So test your shoes out, test your full kit out. If you're going to be wearing a cap, I don't like wearing caps. So I know like I'm not going to put a cap on, but if you do wear a cap because it's going to be sunny, make sure you've got something that is comfortable, that
Yeah.
you're not going to get irritated with and throw away. Um, and yeah, and look, and even then, you're still going to get surprises. When I finished my marathon, I had my right foot, my Achilles tendon was just like completely broken. And I'm pretty sure it was the shoes that I ran in. I have no
Oh
evidence of
no.
this, but it was the only thing that I had not done in the past was the carbon shoes. But you might still get some surprises, but at least it happened after the race, not during the race.
Yes.
So it's just about really being prepared. I think that's the really key thing here is with your gear, your shoes, your hydration vest, your club race vest. Does the club vest fit the way that you want it to do at 30 k's? You want
Yeah.
to be prepared and have no surprises, because when you are in the depths of marathon running, the last thing you want is a shirt like sliding in a weird way, or socks that are giving you blisters, or a heart rate monitor belt that's now like halfway down because it's sweaty and loose. So you want to avoid all the surprises on race day.
No, completely. It's good to start practicing those things. And it might seem like we're talking about this a little bit far out, but the longest run of most plans is still to come. And we have these races to practice these things at, as you mentioned. For example, if you're trying out carbon shoes, then running at faster paces if you are racing maybe a 5 or a 10K, practicing those things. And then also, if you are remembering having to go through remembering all of these things now, you might as well make a list. And then just keep the list, even if it's on your phone's, notes, memo pad, then you've got that, especially if you're traveling to Cape Town. You're maybe not a local, whether you are within South Africa or coming from overseas, then it's just, helps keep the brain a little bit calmer. Maybe you sleep better at night, knowing that you have that list to refer back to. And yeah, you can do the trial and error now instead of on race date. But
Yeah.
yeah, with that in tutu, I think yeah, our golden nuggets, not only just buying those safety pins in
Yes,
case.
I'm gonna say, don't forget the safety pin.
Yeah. The real take home message for today, well, maybe before that, just want to wish you good luck if any of our listeners, and I'm sure lots of you will be, are racing in a week's time. If you are listening to our podcast every single Sunday, then you might be listening to next week's episode after your race. So good luck for our races next weekend. And yeah, just remember what Intutu said about making those adjustments to your schedule, getting in the required recovery so that you are recovering and not just building on fatigue. You can always rewind our podcast and pause Intutu wherever you need to and just listen to his pearls of wisdom once more. But with that, thanks for listening and thank you, Intutu. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and look forward to next week.